Welcome back to the JLL Coaching Pod, episode 25. And we've got some new photos of Italy, of course. Malcesine, Tuscany, lemons from Sicily, Sicilia. What more do you need? I wonder how much the photos will improve the views, probably countlessly. If you're just listening to the Spotify, I hope you're doing well. Today, we're talking about a subject that scares me a little bit. I'm a bit sick, so bear with me. But the topic is, the last episode is exercise selection principles. Dive into it before you listen to this, just so you can get an overview of where we're coming from with this stuff and why we're doing it, etc., etc. Today, we're talking about movement quality and movement quantity. Now, why does this scare me? It scares me because the word quality, it has a lot of meaning for me. Ever since I read the book Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. And that was a huge influential book in my life and an interesting view on philosophy. And I don't want to mess it up. So that's why it's a kind of a big topic for me. Movement quality and movement quantity, and just the words quality being in the mix here, is making me kind of poo myself a little bit. But that's all right. Like, you got to do things that scare you. And with the podcast, I always try and make it as storified, if that's even a word, as possible. So it's engaging and easy to listen to and enjoyable. Whereas the topics, movement quality and movement quantity, and the way I'm going to discuss them, it's quite technical. And to make that an enjoyable listen is the challenge that I'm facing here. So I'm going to do my best. I'm not expecting this one to get a lot of views, and feedback would be so welcomed. You wouldn't even believe. So what am I talking about when I say movement quality? With regards to exercise selection, with regards to performance, movement quality, I would break movement quality down with the reference of exercise selection as the nature of shapes. And that's almost as woo-woo as movement quality. But when I say the nature of shapes, I mean how your body looks, feels, and is in space itself. So, when you're looking at a body, how do you start describing the positions it's in, where in space it is, the potential movement pattern that it's going through, and the plane that it's in. Now, we live in a 3D world, obviously, so it's hard to really go around and decipher what plane people are in specifically, because really, as Bill Hartman would say, there is only one plane, the transverse plane. But it is easy to break things down when you're thinking about them theoretically to get simpler solutions for these complex problems. And I was thinking about a story to talk about. And the only thing that really came to mind was like when you learn about atoms in school, and they're so vague of just like how they are. First, you get this 2D with the nucleus and all of the stuff. And you look at it and you're like, okay, I guess everything ever is made of that. And then they're like, well, this isn't even it. This has been proven wrong. It's 3D, it's three-dimensional, and it's moving around, not just in a two-dimensional plane, but again in a transverse plane in all three dimensions. And that's how I thought of us, and that's how I thought of it. That's the story I could think of for movement quality, the nature of shapes. But in reality, that's so vague, and how do I relate it? So really here, what we're talking about is the pattern that we are going through. And this could be things like triple extension, a hip dominant movement pattern, a knee dominant movement pattern, a horizontal push, vertical pull, vertical push, horizontal pull, or a core exercise for your pelvis or your thorax. Those are some of the patterns that you can describe a human body to go through. And that is level one, or part of the conversation about what movement quality is, and part of the decision-making process that every coach needs to go through when we are selecting a certain exercise to get a certain outcome. So why would we choose a certain exercise? And why is something hip dominant versus knee dominant? Well, for me, I'm outcome driven, right? So the outcome is what we are trying to change. We're trying to change something. We're choosing an exercise in order to create an adaptation. We're not just choosing an exercise to boost ego or faff around. There is an outcome that we are looking for. So when an exercise says it's knee dominant or hip dominant, for me, that is the tissue that is being stimulated. The tissues that do this movement, for example, a horizontal push, you would have your pectorals, your deltoids, and your triceps. Those tissues drive the horizontal push. The hip musculature drives the hip dominant movements. The knee musculature drives the knee dominant movement. So hip dominant would be a thing like an RDL, a hip thrust. Knee dominant would be like a front squat, a goblet squat, a leg extension, this kind of thing. They would fit into that knee dominant category. So you've got a client, you've got yourself, and you're trying to make a decision about which exercise to choose. Well, first of all, you need to see, are they trying to develop their entire body? Is there any particular type or area that they need to work on more? Are they injured in a certain part of their body? Are they trying to get faster? Are they trying to get stronger? Are they trying to be able to produce more power? Are they trying to be able to produce more power repeatedly? Or are they trying to produce more power repeatedly quickly? Are they trying to get more economical or efficient in a certain movement pattern, such as running? And all of these things you would take into consideration when you are choosing the pattern that you would program. Now, I'm giving you a lot here with regards to the movement patterns, and I'm trying to give you a few examples of the exercise that fit into those movement patterns. And what I would really, really encourage you all to do is write down lists of exercises that fit into every single category. Hip dominant, knee dominant, horizontal push, horizontal pull, etc., and categorize them in a way that they move along a spectrum. And we will talk about what kind of things you could consider. But first, just chuck a load of exercise down for each one, and let's think about organizing them in a certain way. Going through this movement quality and movement quantity might help you get some principles or draw some principles out to help organize this exercise selection activity. So we've talked a little bit about pattern, why we would choose a certain pattern. We're looking for certain outcomes, and we need to train certain movement patterns to get certain outcomes. But how do we know where to position this person in space? We've got a variety of movement options. You can think of your body as it's in a sphere, just like an atom would be, and we can almost move freely within that 360-degree sphere around us. But we need to give ourselves some constraints in order to kind of get some practical takeaways here, and that's where stance would come in. To break it down easily, I'm going to give you 3 options of different stances that you can drive different movement patterns. We will talk about mainly the resistance movement patterns. So that will be a key 7, and that will be your hip dominant, knee dominant, horizontal push, horizontal pull, vertical push. And then you've got your core exercises. That will be the predominant movement exercises that we will be looking at, movement patterns that we'll be looking at. And when you're selecting a certain exercise, you can choose to do it bilateral symmetrical. And that's when you've got your legs next to each other. Your legs are in line, kind of inside or outside of your hips or under your hips, and you're square on, you're symmetrical. You could think about the defensive lineman in football, rugby players in a scrum, bilateral symmetrical stance. This is where you're going to do your main power lifts, deadlifts, squats, and then you've got other options around there. So you've got asymmetrical front back stance. This would be your basic split squat. And again, with the legs, you can move that back leg in different positions, 360 degrees around, and that will give you a full range of motion and options with regards to the feet, not including asymmetrical lateral. And that's when you have that one of your legs under you, under your sternum, your nose, middle of your pelvis, and the other leg will be out to the side. You can think of an ice skater flying along the ground. 3 different stances that you can apply to each pattern. So for example, we've got a hip dominant movement. If we want a bilateral symmetrical stance, we could do a deadlift. We want an asymmetrical front to back stance, we could do a B stance, RDL. We want an isometrical lateral, we could do a kind of Cossack position hinge. Or when you've got your leg up and elevated on a bench, one laterally out to the side, and you're doing a hinge there, there's a bunch of different options. And the last concept for movement quality and the nature of shapes that we're going to talk about is the plane of motion. So we have the sagittal plane. Sagittal plane, this is the plane of motion that you look from side on. Sagittal side, so this would be this would be movement patterns such as flexion and extension and all the associated ones with that, like plantar flexion, dorsiflexion, all of those. And this is kind of the anti-gravity plane. This is the one that stops you falling forwards, stops you falling backwards. Then you've got your frontal plane, which is, again, you're going to look from the front on, abduction, adduction, this kind of thing that you can see happening at the legs and at the arms. Things that look different from the front on. Then you've got your transverse plane, which is a top-down perspective, again, looking at that rotational transverse plane, which you can consider your wind up and wind down, internal, external rotation, those kind of ideas in the transverse plane. Now, I think you can see, as I've said, bit sick. If you stuck with me this far, muchos respect, because ideally I've got a presentation up and I'm talking you through it. But these are quite hard topics to get a grasp on just listening to an audio clip. But hopefully, if you have questions and you are listening, you can just pop in a DM and we can get a little conversation going. Nature of shapes, movement quality, pattern, stance, plane. So that's how you go ahead and make decisions around movement quality with regards to exercise selection. Those are the first 3 things that you want to think about. Which pattern are we using, in which stance, and in which plane of motion. And that will change, and that will give us different movement types, which will give us a different stimulus on a different set of musculature. Next thing is movement quantity. Now, this is super important. This is super, super important with regards to pursuing those objective changes in physical qualities, in adaptations. These are things like load, how much load is on the bar, what resistance do we have on the cables, internal and external load. So yes, the external load we're placing on that person and the internal load that they are receiving. The duration of the exercise, which will dictate again the specific outcomes that we are going to look for. If it's less than 10 seconds, it's likely going to be that alactic, anaerobic, super intense phosphocreatine system that we're working on. If it's going to be 10 to 60 to 120 seconds, it's still going to be that anaerobic lactase system that we're going to work and do the majority of work on. If it's above 120 seconds, it's going to be that aerobic, longer duration biased physical qualities that we're adapting. Then you've got the velocity. Again, this will kind of tell us if we're working on more elastic qualities versus more muscular qualities. The velocity that you're moving, are you working on power or strength? You've got your force velocity curve. The lower the velocity, the more in the higher the force can potentially be, and vice versa. Higher the velocity, the lower the force is likely to be. Awesome. For me, that was it. That's it. It's going to be a short episode today, just talking about movement quality and movement quantity. I hope some of you got some value there. This is, again, a part of this exercise selection series, and I'm really using this series to get my thoughts together and everything here. And again, clarity will come over time, thinking over these ideas again and again. Thanks for listening. Hope you have a great day. I'll see you on the other side.